Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see an introduction of New Criticism. New Criticism is an Anglo-American variety of formalism. New Criticism emerged in US in the 1920s and flourished from 1930s to 1960s. And these new critics shared with the Russian formalist a sense that literary language, particularly poetry, is should be different from that of the practical speech. And the new critics also advocated the close reading of individual, particularly in poetry. And they also favored the text over both reader and context, and therefore they made semantics very important tool in literary analysis. The term new criticism was coined by Joel Spingarn. He delivered a lecture in 1910 under this title, The New Criticism. John Spingarn was influenced by Croc's expressionist theory of art, and Crocs advocated a creative and imaginative criticism which gave more importance to the aesthetic qualities of literature over historical, psychological, and moral considerations. And some of the important features of new criticism originated in England during the 1920s in the works of T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, as well as the seminal studies of I.A. Richards and William Emerson. And decades of biographical and belletristic criticism which focused on the author's intention, that is, with what intention did the author create that work, or on the aesthetics, that is the beauty, had reduced the study of poetry to what Eliot called opinion or fancy, which is unconnected to technical and rhetorical accomplishments. Matthew Arnold's criticism also emphasized tradition and high seriousness and tended to treat literature as a means for conveying normative moral and ethical ideas. That is, he felt that literary work should give moral and ethical ideals to the reader. And by the end of the First World War, a new generation of poets who were experimenting with form and language, and their work could no longer be judged according to biographical and aesthetic criteria used by the traditional critics. And therefore we needed a new method to analyze their works. And Richard's principles of literary criticism advanced literary critical notions such as irony, tension, and balance, as well as distinguish between poetic and other uses of languages. And Richard's practical criticism based on students' analysis of poems emphasized the importance of objective and balanced close reading, which was sensitive to the figurative language of literature. Richard's student William Emerson produced his most important influential work, The Seven Types of Anxiety, which was held up as a model of new critical close reading. And notable among these pioneers were John Crowe Ransom and Alan Tate, who developed some of the ideas of Eliot and Richards. Ransom edited the Poetry magazine with The Fugitive from 1922 to 1975 with a group of writers including Tate, Robert Penn Warren, and Donald Davidson. And other journals associated with the new criticism included the Southern Review, edited by Per Warren and Kenneth Brooks, the Kenyon Review, run by Ransom, and the Still Extant Sevenue Review, edited by Tate and others. Kenneth Brooks' studies of English and US poetry set the tone for a new kind of formalist criticism that actually emphasized paradox as a constitutive feature of poetic language. The different and often conflicting strands of the new criticism are considered in Wimsatt and Bradley's The Verbal Icon. They expose two fundamental errors in contemporary theory, and those two errors are the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. Now, what is intentional fallacy? The intentional fallacy is a form of the genetic fallacy found in philosophy, and this refers to the common assumption that the meaning of a work corresponds with the author's intention, that is, what the author wanted to inform. That was the main concern here. And the affective fallacy refers to a category mistake, a confusion between the poem and its results. Poetry does not acquire its meaning by producing a particular kind of result in the reader, but rather by simply existing as a verbal object. That is, a poem should not mean, but it should be. The user of new criticism should practice, identify the texture, that is, its verbal patterns, like example, tropes and imaginary in poetry, narrative design, dramatic techniques, and especially ironies and paradoxes at the level of both action and imagery, and should highlight especially those image patterns that cross two opposing values or terms. And second is relate these verbal patterns to the meanings the work both enunciates and instigates, establishing how ironies and paradoxes in particular represent a successful reconciliation of contraries, the universal and the particular. And some of the central documents of new criticism were written by relatively late adherents like W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Birdley's essays, The Intentional Fallacy and The Affective Fallacy. Austin Warren's The Theory of Literature, W.K. Wimsatt's The Verbal Icon, the Murray Krieger's The New Apologist for Poetry. John Crowe Ransom wrote a series of essays entitled The New Criticism, and he became the forerunner of the new criticism trend. His essay is motivated by the desire to make literary criticism more scientific or precise and systematic. Ransom's position is that the critic must study literature, not about literature. That is, he must study the work and he should not study about literature. And here criticism should include personal impressions, because the critical activity should cite the nature of the object rather than its effect upon the subject. And synopsis and paraphrase, since the plot or story is an abstraction from the real content of the text. And historical studies, which might include literary backgrounds, biography, literary sources and analogues. Linguistic studies, which include identifying allusions and meanings of words. Moral content, since this is not the whole content of the text. And finally, any other special studies which deal with some abstract or prose content taken out of the work. And William K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Birdsley. William Wimsatt and the philosopher Birdsley produced two influential and controversial papers that propounded central positions of new criticism, and they are the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. What Wimsatt and Birdsley are opposing is what they take to be a romantic intentional fallacy. The romantic idea expressed in ancient times by Longinus and more recently by the German writer Goethe and the Italian philosopher Benedetto Croce, that a poem echoes the soul of its author, that it embodies his intentions or psychological circumstances. Like Ransom, Wimsatt and Birdsley are concerned to exclude from criticism certain related studies such as authors, psychology, biography and history. They in fact make a distinction between internal and external evidence for the meaning of a poem. Wimsatt and Birdsley's later essay, The Affective Fallacy, is motivated by the same presupposition, namely that literature or poetry is an autonomous object. It is independent not only of author psychology, biography and history, but also of the reader or audience that consumes it. The word affection is used by philosophers to refer to emotion, mental state or disposition. Hence, affective fallacy occurs, according to Wimsatt and Bradley, when we attempt to exempliate or interpret a poem through recourse to the emotions or mental state produced in the reader or hearer. In general, Wimsatt and Birdsley argue that when readers report that a poem or story induces in them vivid images, intense feelings or heightened consciousness, such statements are too vague to be refuted or to be used by the objective critic. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box. Like the video, share with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.